This is You Can Heal Your Heart, Finding Peace After a Breakup, Divorce, or Death by Louise L. Hay and David Kessler. Author's note: we wrote this book to explore how we grieve and find healing after enduring any type of loss, such as a breakup, divorce, or death. Grieving is challenging, but it's our thoughts that often add suffering to our pain. We hope that this book will expand your awareness and thinking around loss to include love and understanding. Our intention is for you to feel your grief fully without getting stuck in the sorrow and suffering. Grief is not a condition to be cured, but a natural part of life. Spirit does not know loss. It knows that every story begins and every story ends, yet love is eternal. Our hope is that the words on these pages offer you comfort and peace throughout your journey. No book, however, should be used to replace professional help if that is needed. We wish you much love and healing. Louise and David. Preface. I've been working in the field of grief for most of my life. I've been fortunate to write 4 books on the subject, including 2 with the legendary Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the renowned psychiatrist and author of the groundbreaking book on death and dying. During my lectures, I'm continually asked, does grief work apply to divorce? Even at parties, the newly single person will find me and ask, can you help me? I've just gone through a breakup and I heard you know a lot about grief. It's always a reminder that the work I do applies to the ending of relationships and marriages as well as the end of life. The truth is that loss is loss and grief is grief, no matter what it's about or what caused it. I can't count the times I've heard people talk harshly about themselves during a breakup or when a marriage has ended, and I've often thought back to my friend Louise Hay, author of the international bestseller You Can Heal Your Life, who always says, pay attention to your thinking. In order to launch my latest book, Visions, Trips, and Crowded Rooms, I was invited to speak at Hay House Conference. Although my book was being released by Louise's publishing company, I hadn't seen her in years. I was looking forward to spending some time with her. We'd planned to have lunch right after my presentation. A few minutes after I'd begun, I could feel something happening in the audience. I noticed people turning to one another and whispering. I had no idea what was going on, so I just continued speaking. Then it hit me. Louise had walked in and sat down. Despite her efforts to be unnoticed, she carries that kind of energetic force with her. At lunch, she and I caught up on mutual friends and what was new, and then she said, David, I've been thinking about it, and I want you to be with me when I die. I would be honored, I replied immediately. Since I'm a death and grief expert, it's not unusual to get asked things like that. Most people don't want to die alone. They want to know that their lives and deaths will be witnessed by someone who is comfortable with the end of life. To that end, the acclaimed actor Anthony Perkins asked me to be with him when he died. Best-selling author Marianne Williamson asked me to be with her and her father when he passed. And I was there when my mentor, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, took her last breath. Then I asked Louise, is there anything going on? Something about your health that I should know about? No, she replied. I'm 82, healthy as I can be, and I'm living my life fully. I just want to make sure when my time comes, I live my dying fully. That's Louise. During the conference, she was scheduled to screen a documentary called Doors Opening, which told the story of her famous hayrides, weekly Wednesday night meetings for people with AIDS and their loved ones in the 1980s. This was where Louise Hay's world and mine first came together. On a rare occasion when she missed a Wednesday night, I'd fill in for her. And what a thrilling ride it was. Picture 350 or so attendees, mostly men and some women with AIDS. Those were the early days of the epidemic, before treatments became available. For the most part, these people were dealing with a catastrophic event in their lives. And then there was Louise, sitting in the midst of it all, not seeing it as catastrophic, but as a life-challenging opportunity. During those meetings, she invited a healing energy into the room, yet she made it perfectly clear this was not a pity party. There was no room to be a victim. Rather, these meetings provided a chance to achieve deeper healing, a healing of the soul. My mind flooded with memories as I recalled those inspiring magical evenings. Now, more than 25 years later, Louise and I were once again in a room together, reflecting on those days and the profound impact it had on our lives. When the documentary began, after a brief introduction, Louise grabbed my hand and we started to walk down the aisle. Our plan was to talk and catch up more, and then return when the film was over to conduct a question and answer session with the audience. We were halfway down the aisle when she paused. "Oh, look," Louise said. "There's Tom on the screen." Tom was an original Hayride member who had long since died. "Everyone is so young," I said. "Let's sit for a couple of minutes," she whispered as she pulled me into the back row. We ended up watching the whole documentary. Afterwards, we got up, composed ourselves, walked onto the stage, and the questioning began. What is sickness? If thoughts create healing, why do we take the medicine? Why do we die? What is death? Every answer that Louise provided gave information and insight into what illnesses are. Then she would give me a nod to interject my thoughts, as if we were playing tennis and she was volleying the ball to me. Our 10-minute Q&A lasted 45 minutes and probably could have gone on for another few hours. And just when I thought the talk was over, Louise proudly announced to everyone, "Oh, I've arranged for David Kessler to be with me when I die." The audience applauded. What I thought had been a private request, Louise was now sharing with the world. That was an example of her power, honesty, and openness. That evening, Reed Tracy, the president and CEO of Hay House, told me, "Louise and I were just talking about the two of you doing something together. You share a common history and can offer a lot of wisdom. We think you two should write a book together." I could only imagine Louise Hay sharing her insights on healing regarding one of life's greatest challenges. Whether it's coming to terms with the end of a relationship through divorce or a breakup, facing the death of a loved one, or enduring many other types of losses, such as the loss of a beloved pet or even a beloved job. Louise's wise words, "Pay attention to your thinking," flashed through my mind once again. What if she and I wrote a book together that incorporated her affirmations and knowledge about how our thinking can heal ourselves with my years of experience in helping others cope with grief and loss? I thought about how many people a book like this could help. I also thought what it would be like to work so closely with Louise on such an important topic. It turns out that our collaboration on this book was as seamless as our Q&A session at the conference, adding our own insights picked up over the years while also completing and complementing each other's thoughts on various subjects. And so our journey began. Please note that aside from the preface in Chapter 1, where I describe the start of our writing process together and share our initial conversations, the voice throughout this book belongs to both Louise and me. However, for the audiobook, Louise will be reading the affirmations and the afterword, and I will be reading the rest of the text. Introduction. A broken heart is also an open heart. Whatever the circumstances, when you love someone and your time together ends, you will naturally feel the pain. The pain of losing a person you love is part of life, part of its journey, but the suffering doesn't have to be. Although it's natural to forget your power after the loss of a loved one. The truth is that after a breakup, divorce, or death, there remains an ability, within you to create a new reality. Let's be clear here. We are asking you to change your thinking after a loss occurs, not to avoid the pain of grief, but to keep moving through it. We want your thoughts to live in a place where you remember your loved one only with love, not with sadness or regret. Even after the worst breakup, the meanest divorce, the most tragic death, it is possible to achieve this over time. That doesn't mean you deny or run away from the pain. Instead, you let yourself experience it and then allow a new life to unfold, one where you hold the love dear, not the sorrow. Here's where our real work begins. There are 3 main areas we're going to be focusing on throughout this book. 1. Helping you feel your feelings. If you're reading this book, then you're most likely hurting. And that's something we don't want to take away from you. But this time can be a vital window, not only to heal your pain, but if you feel your feelings fully, to also begin to release it. One of the biggest problems is that you might push aside or ignore your feelings. You judge them as wrong, too little, too much. You carry a lot of bottled up emotions, and anger is often one that is suppressed. In order for it to heal, however, it must be released. We are not speaking only about anger associated with death, but about any time we feel anger. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the renowned grief expert who identified the 5 stages of grief, said that we could feel the anger, let it pass through us, and be done with it in a few minutes. She went on to say that any anger we feel over 15 minutes is old anger. Of course, anger is only one of the emotions that arise. When a relationship ends, when divorce happens, and even when death occurs, we are left with so many feelings. Feeling them is the first step towards healing. 2. Allow your old wounds to come up for healing. Your loss will be a window into your wounds, and like it or not, they are going to come forth. Some of them you may not be aware of. When you think you're going through a breakup, for example, you may think, I knew he wasn't going to stay. In a divorce, you may believe that I don't deserve love. Or when a loved one dies, bad things always happen to me. These are negative thoughts that stretch beyond the current loss. It's certainly helpful to take advantage of grief as a time to reflect on the pain with tenderness. But to relive it over and over is painful and non-productive. That's what you tend to do when you go back without the intention of healing. Where did these negative thoughts originate? The answer is they originated in your past and weren't healed with love. Together we'll shine a light on those old wounds and negative thought processes and begin the healing process with love and compassion. 3. Changing distorted thinking about relationships, love, and life. When you grieve a loss, you apply your current thinking, which is at best often distorted. What do we mean by that? It is when your childhood beliefs are colored by the wounds of childhood and shaped by the hurts from past relationships. Distorted thinking is often molded by your parents and others in your life who did the best they could, but they also carried their own distorted thinking from their childhoods. All of this works together to form the current self-talk in your mind as you think your same thoughts over and over again. Then you begin to bring this old thinking, the negative self-talk, into your new loss. This is why human beings so often talk to themselves without love and tenderness after we've lost someone we care for deeply. We blame ourselves, we throw a pity party, we even feel that we deserve the pain we're now experiencing. How do we break the cycle? Read on to learn about the importance of positive affirmations and their powerful effect on distorted thinking. The power of affirmations to heal grief. Affirmations are statements that reinforce a positive or negative belief. We want to raise your awareness of the negative ones you might use and gently invite new positive ones to come into your life. If you're thinking, you're always affirming something. Unfortunately, when your thinking is distorted, you're usually repeating negative affirmations. We're going to lovingly introduce positive affirmations to your grief and to your life. These positive statements may feel untrue when you first use them. Let them in anyway. You may be afraid we're trying to take away your grief or diminish it in some way, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Your grief is always yours to feel, but the positive affirmations can take away your suffering as well as heal some of your old pain and negative thought patterns. Your negative affirmations are untrue, yet you have no trouble feeling those. Many people unconsciously repeat negative affirmations, being so cruel to themselves when they're hurting. One of the main goals we hope to accomplish in this book is to find a way to change that repetitive negative thinking for good. As you read the positive affirmations in the upcoming chapters, be sure to apply them to your own experiences. Apply them to your thought patterns, your beliefs, how you view the world, using them to undo your limited, negative thinking. Some affirmations may resolve your old wounds from the past to help you process your current ones so that you can finally fully heal with love. The gift of life after loss. We're sure you know how to end a relationship. You know how to end a marriage. You even know how to end a life. But do you know how to complete a relationship or a marriage? Do you know how to complete a life? This is another aspect we hope to teach you as we journey together. There are unexpected gifts to be found in life after loss. These may seem like new concepts to you, but the truth is that not all relationships are meant to last. Some will last a month, others a year, others a decade. You'll feel pain when you believe the one-year relationship should have lasted 5 years. You feel pain because you think the 10-year relationship should have lasted 25 years. The same is true of marriages. Can you think of a marriage as a success when it ends in divorce? Well, it can be. It can be perfect for the experience that you and your spouse needed. Even when life ends, there's a rhythm. It's sad, of course, because you want more time with your loved one. That's only natural. But there are only 2 requirements for a complete life: a birthday and a death day. That's it. We all arrive in the middle of the movie, and we leave in the middle of it. We want to hold on to the connection to our loved ones who died. We want to keep our memories, and we certainly want to release the pain. We'll get started by examining our thoughts around loss in Chapter 1. What are your thoughts about breakups? How do you feel about a marriage ending? How do you respond when a loved one dies? What's it like when a beloved pet dies? As we take you through these questions, we'll help you begin to change your thoughts around loss. In Chapter 2, we move on to relationships. Even though you may be reading this book in the midst of a breakup, others may be in the throes of a divorce or a death. Regardless of your current situation, we encourage you to read this chapter because every marriage and every divorce started with a relationship. Every death is about a relationship. Chapter 3 focuses specifically on the grief of a divorce. And then in Chapter 4, we'll look at grief after a loved one dies. In the same way we suggested that you read the relationship chapter, we also suggest that you read the chapter on death, because every breakup and every divorce is also a death on a certain level. In the remaining chapters, we'll spend time exploring the many other types of losses that we experience in our lifetime, from the loss of a pet to the loss of a job to the loss of a pregnancy and much more. We'll even examine ways of healing types of losses that aren't so easily seen on the surface, such as grieving something in life that never was and never will be. The following pages contain new thinking, heartwarming stories, and powerful affirmations geared to specific situations. The stories throughout are taken from real people in real situations who have lovingly chose to share their life's challenges and lessons with us so that we could share them with you. Our ultimate wish is that you discover that no matter what you're facing, you can heal your heart. You deserve a loving, peaceful life. Let's begin this healing process together. Louise and David. Chapter 1. Changing Our Thoughts About Loss. On my drive to San Diego for the first meeting with Louise, I thought about what questions I would ask. Louise is known for saying, "Thoughts create." How would that apply in loss? I thought about the breakup of a relationship. I also thought about loss and death, recalling a dear friend who was grieving the sudden, unexpected passing of her husband. I wanted to hear Louise's opinion on this situation. After all, she is practically the mother of the New Thought movement. A pioneer in mind-body healing, Louise was one of the first to introduce the connection between physical ailments and their corresponding thought patterns and emotional issues. Now I would be asking her to bring her wisdom, experiences, and insight to the most challenging time in a person's life. Even though I had already written 4 books on the subject myself, I forever remain a student. I mean, honestly, how could anyone say they know everything about loss? Louise herself has written so many books and so many meditations that I was eagerly anticipating her unique perspective on this important topic. Soon after I rang the doorbell to Louise's condo, there she was, with her ever-endearing hug, inviting me into her home. She showed me around as I admired her surroundings. I immediately felt that this wonderful home, with its plush furniture and myriad mementos she collected from her extensive travels to remote parts of the world, was befitting a woman of Louise's stature. I was gazing out at the stunning views from her windows when she turned to me and said, "Shall we talk over lunch? There's a great place around the corner." Within moments, I was walking arm in arm down the streets of San Diego with Louise Hay. No one would have ever guessed that we were about to discuss one of the most painful subjects in the world as we ate. When we sat, I saw the waitstaff's faces light up at Louise's presence. "You're going to love the food here," she assured me. After we placed our order, I took out my recorder. "Louise," I said, "I've written so much about the medical, psychological, and emotional aspects of loss and grief. I've also touched on the spiritual aspects in each of my books. While I was at a bookstore the other day, I thought about this book and realized that it would be one of the few that is devoted to deeply exploring the spiritual side of relationships ending, divorce, death, and other losses. So, tell me your beginning thoughts on the spiritual aspects." "Our thinking creates our experience," Louise said. "That doesn't mean the loss didn't happen or that the grief isn't real. It means that our thinking shapes our experience of loss." She continued, "David, since you say we each experience grief differently, let's explore why." I told Louise about my friend whose husband had died suddenly from a brain bleed. But Louise surprised me when she didn't ask about the nature of my friend's loss. Instead, she said, "Tell me about her thinking." We each feel differently because we each have different thoughts about our grief. Her thinking is the key. I caught myself wanting to ask, how would I know what she was thinking? But then I realized where Louise was going. "Oh," I said, "her thoughts, her actions, her grief would reflect her thoughts." Louise put her hand on mine and smiled. "Yes," she replied. "Tell me some of the things she says." "Okay, some of the things I've heard are, 'I can't believe this is happening. This is the worst thing that's ever happened.' And 'I will never love again.' Good, Louise said. She's telling us a lot. Let's take a statement like, I will never love again. You know how important I believe affirmations are. Affirmations are positive self-talk. So think about what she's saying to herself in grief. I will never love again. That statement can create reality. But more important, it doesn't serve her or her loss. The pain of grief is one thing. Our thoughts then add suffering. Out of her pain, she may feel like she will never love again. But if she was open to some other ways, some suggestions, she could delve into the underlying beliefs about her statement. Some other thoughts could be,
I have experienced a powerful love in my life. I trust this love I feel for my husband is everlasting. When I think of my husband and my love for him, my heart sings.
I added, for people who want to go deeper, quicker, or have moved further in time away from death, they might say,
I am open to loving again. As long as I live, I will experience love in all its forms.
Louise leaned in and said, I hope you realize that we don't say these things only after the death of a loved one. We say these things in our relationship breakups and our divorce too, so let's make sure we examine all those areas. As Louise and I talked, I thought about how there are people who always take the negative path. Yet, there are also those who do their best to end things well in relationships and to find the positive. Take, for example, Darren and Jessica. Darren saw religion as something for his parents and his family, not something he had chosen for himself. But then he and Jessica discovered religious science and began attending a local church. The sermons covered familiar, everyday topics, Darren said, like buying a home, falling in love, getting married, managing money, and much more, but always with no judgments, only acceptance and wisdom. This spiritual talk was about a far more expansive love than what Jessica and I were raised with. As the years pass, we would read books, meditate, and go to workshops. The joke was that years later, we realized that our adage, karma sees all, was a lot like our parents' golden rule. After 22 years of what had seemed to be a good marriage, Darren felt something had changed in the relationship. As Jessica explained to me later, life seemed half over and yet underexplored fully. I felt at first, I wanted out. I wanted more. It wasn't about sex or affairs. It was just that I had signed up for a lifelong commitment without fully understanding how long life was and how much more there was to do. I loved Darren, but he was happy being at home, doing nothing and just relaxing. The slower life that suited Darren was boring for me. When I told him that I wanted our relationship to end in its current form and I wanted out, he was furious. He felt I had betrayed him. He took it personally, but it wasn't personal. He accused me of not loving him anymore, but that wasn't true. I did still love him, but the reality was that our romantic relationship was over. I knew that if I stayed, both of us would become very unhappy. It was sad, but I had to go. The truth is that all of us are always moving towards exploring the wounds that need healing. Our progress may not always be obvious or smooth, but love will deliver everything unlike itself to our doorstep for healing. So while Darren perceived heartbreak from the split, his wife felt not fear or hurt, but an overwhelming sense of adventure. As she packed her bags, she gently wiped the tears from his face and said, "You think I'm leaving you, but I'm not. I'm moving out, but I'll still be in the world with you. You think I don't love you, but I do. And this is best for both of us. I know on some level that if it's right for my future, then it must be right for yours." Darren remained hurt and angry. "Just admit it," he said. "You don't love me anymore." Jessica replied, "Sometimes saying goodbye is another way of saying I love you." It was stories like theirs that don't often get retold in the breakup world. I often ponder how little we know about ending things like relationships, marriages, and jobs. We just don't know how to complete them. And it's hard to accept that while every relationship has a beginning, some of them also have endings. Honoring the love. Louise and I were deep in discussion about dealing with grief when our food arrived. Smiling, she looked at her meal and smelled it. She gave thanks, which felt more genuine and deeper to me than the typical grace we utter out of obligation or habit. "You really meant that, didn't you?" I asked when she was finished praying. "Yes," she told me, "because life loves me, and I love life. I am so grateful." I must admit that, at first, this felt a little over the top, but then I remembered whom I'm sitting with. The one person who has proven time and again that affirmations work. I'd just been caught off guard as I saw this tool actually playing out in Louise's life. She savored every bite of her lunch as she explained to me that affirmations are not about pretending that grief doesn't exist. It doesn't go away if you pretend it's not there. What do you think happens to it? "If you're not ready to experience it," I said, "I believe it will remain on hold for you to deal with it when you're ready. If not now, later. The timing is your choice, and there are periods when we need to shelve our grief. It might be too soon, too painful. Maybe we're too busy raising a child or holding a job. Whatever the situation, there will come a time when grief has sat too long on the shelf. It will become old, unattended, angry, and it will begin to impact your life in a negative way. But that doesn't have to be your reality." Louise nodded. "You have the power within to create a new, more positive reality. When you change your thoughts about grief and loss, it doesn't mean you won't feel the pain or you won't go through the grief. It just means that you won't get stuck in any one feeling. When people look back on loss, they often say they're glad they felt their emotions fully. They're glad they gave themselves time to fully mourn the end of a relationship. Or, if a loved one died, they're glad they honored their grief afterwards. However, I frequently heard people say after an extended grieving period that I didn't need to give the pain as much time as I did. When we talked about a 29-year-old woman named Caroline who was just getting back into the dating scene, she said she didn't regret any relationship she had, but she did regret taking the last 5 years to get over a 3-year relationship. "I see that," I said. "A woman once shared with me that nearly a decade after her husband died in an auto accident, she realized that she would miss him and love him for the rest of her life. But she would rather have learned sooner to remember their love. And when she and I were nearly finished working together, she told me, 'Honoring the love, that's what I'm going to do from here on out. No more honoring the pain.'" That's what we want to teach. We want to honor the love, not the pain, not the suffering. Louise looked directly into my eyes and continued, "In this book, we'll teach about intentions. The work will be about affirmations applied to grief and loss. It will bring hope to sorrow. We can teach people that they can go from grief to peace and show them how to do it. They can heal their losses and their hearts. It doesn't have to hurt for the rest of their lives. But they aren't going to get there in a day." "Very true," I replied. "Healing from loss isn't like getting a cold and a week later you're better. Healing takes time, but we can teach people to say they're looking forward to peace. The grief before the peace is extremely important because it's an authentic expression of your feelings as you build a new foundation, a stronger one. I often think about Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Healing your heart is about ultimately finding acceptance and living in reality. I'm not suggesting you'll be glad that a loss has happened or say it's okay, but you have to acknowledge the reality of it, even though all you want is your loved one back. I shared the following story with Louise. Christina was a young woman who was diagnosed with early onset ovarian cancer. It was very aggressive. It seemed like everyone in her life was trying to deal with the news when things shifted to the fact that she was dying. In an unusual twist, sometimes people who are very young find it easier to accept death than their parents do. In Christina's case, it was her mother, Deborah, who was struggling to keep up with the events that were happening. Christina was an interesting, brave soul who had insight into her world about what she could change and what she could not. She knew that she was dying, and she accepted it, which brought her a certain peace. During her illness, she and her mother would often argue. Deborah would say, "You're just too young to die." "Well, how do you explain the fact that I am dying?" was Christina's reply. "Your life is incomplete. You can't die so young." "Mom, there's only 2 requirements for a complete life: birth and death. Soon my life will be complete because I have lived and I have died. That's just the way it is, and we have to find peace in it." If anything kept Christina awake at night, it was worrying about her mother. After Christina passed, I would see Deborah every few months and still think about how Christina wanted peace so much for her mother, and yet it eluded her. But years later, I ran into Deborah and immediately sensed a shift that I couldn't explain. I asked her if anything had changed. She told me. I admitted that I wanted Christina back more than I wanted peace. Eventually, I realized that I wanted peace for myself and for Christina. I finally understood what it meant to want someone you love to rest in peace. To this day, I told Louise, Christina and Deborah always remind me of how it is important to want peace. Louise agreed. We forget to feel and to understand the words from our upbringing. Think about those words, rest in peace. We've all heard them, but in Deborah's situation, she ultimately wanted her daughter to find that peace, knowing that love is eternal and never dies. And likewise, Christina would have wanted her mother to rest in peace every night as well, acknowledging the bond that death cannot sever. Now Deborah rests in her firm belief that they will one day see each other again. Whatever kind of loss your grief stems from, it's vital to hold the thought of wanting to find peace and to find a healing heart. It is comforting and powerful to know that fully grieving and finding peace is always an available option. In fact, this book contains a number of options that you may have not considered before, including challenging your thoughts and using affirmations to change unhealthy thought patterns. Just remember that healing your loss and your heart is possible. People do it successfully all the time, but you always must keep in mind that your grief is as unique as your fingerprint. You must recognize your loss and your grief in order to heal your heart fully. People often get mad at friends who don't understand their loss. They may not, and perhaps never will, but you and you alone can truly appreciate your loss because it is you who can heal it. Different kinds of loss. Most people are surprised to learn that there are many different types of loss. Loss is loss, they say, and that is true on one level. However, since there are many types of specific losses, it's worth looking at their archetypes. In the remainder of this chapter, we'll focus on complicated loss, loss in limbo, and disenfranchised grief. It's important to remember that grief is a reaction to those losses. We don't want to dwell in the intricacies of the types, understanding that what kind of loss you're experiencing can sometimes help you find your best self in the situation. Complicated loss. To put it simply, complicated loss is any loss that has been complicated by other factors. Most of us know that we will experience loss when a relationship naturally ends. When two people mutually agree on separation and divorce, that is uncomplicated loss. When the death of an elderly relative happens in an expected way after a good long life, that is uncomplicated loss. How many of these are there? How often does everyone agree, and how often do things end well? Everyone's lives are complicated, and so are their losses, of course. Losses become complicated when you don't expect them to happen. In other words, the loss was a surprise. While you may name it, and it may well be a complicated loss, no matter how complex, the possibility for healing is always there. Let's look at some examples of how we can change our thinking. In a relationship, when one person wants a separation and the other one doesn't, you may want to add this to your thinking.
While I don't accept this separation now, I will accept it as reality so my healing can begin.
The same thinking can be used for divorce.
I don't believe we need to divorce, but my partner wants it. While I don't agree with it, I do believe that we choose our own destiny, and my partner has chosen his. Everyone has a right to choose to be in a marriage or not.
When someone young dies, you might say to yourself,
I didn't see this death coming. I believe this person had more to experience in life, but I remind myself that I do not see all or know all. While I may have feelings of anger and confusion, I don't know what anyone's journey is supposed to be.
remember that while the loss is complicated, the healing doesn't have to be. Loss in limbo. Here are some examples of loss in limbo. After a third breakup in a relationship, a couple might say, "The separation is killing us. We wish we could make this work or finally end it for good." Some helpful affirmations may be,
This separation will reveal helpful information. This relationship will grow or end in its own time.
individuals dealing with serious ongoing health care issues might say, "The days we spend waiting for test results are excruciating. I either want to completely get better or die." A good affirmation may be,
My health is not solely defined by a test result.
"Wondering if there is going to be a loss can feel as bad as loss itself. Life sometimes forces you to live in limbo, not knowing if you will experience a loss or not. You may have to wait several hours to hear if your loved one's surgery went well, or days until your loved one is out of a coma. You may wait in limbo for hours, days, weeks, or longer when a child is missing. The families of soldiers who are missing in action are often wrenched by decades of living in limbo. And years later, those left behind still haven't resolved their losses and may not be able to do so until they learn the truth. But that information may never come. Being in the limbo of loss is in itself a loss. It doesn't have to be that way, however. In the storm, you can find a port. During the limbo of loss, you probably scare yourself with the worst possible outcomes. You don't know how you'll survive if this loss actually happens. In these situations, you can become paralyzed and are no help at all to others or yourself. A healing affirmation for the situation is,
even though I do not know the whereabouts of my loved one, I trust that he or she is safely cared for in the loving hands of the universe.
In a breakup, for example, you might think, I must get him back. I'm not ready for this to end. Well, think again. What if instead you said to yourself,
I may not know the outcome, but life loves me, and I will be fine with him or without him.
if you're having a hard time breaking up with someone, try saying this to yourself.
If I am not the one for her, someone else is. So let me get out of the way so that they can come together.
Disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief is a result of a loss for which people do not feel they have a socially recognized right to grieve. Disenfranchised grief is often not openly mourned or approved of. Some examples are: the relationship is not socially approved of or publicly recognized, such as a gay and lesbian relationship or marriage. Try thinking.
Regardless of what others think about my love, I honor my love and my loss.
The relationship exists primarily in the past. For example, the deceased is an ex-wife or an ex-husband. Try thinking.
Even though my loved one is now my ex, my feelings of love are not just in the past, but also in the present. I will fully grieve my love for him or her.
The loss is hidden or not easy to see. Hidden losses include abortion or miscarriages. Try thinking.
I see and honor the loss of my child.
There is a stigma connected to how the person died. This could be a death that appears to have an element of poor decision-making or what some consider sin. Suicide, AIDS, alcoholism, or drug overdose are all examples. Try thinking. For suicide,
My loved one was in pain and could not see a way out. Now I see him as whole and at peace.
for AIDS,
My loved one is beautiful and worthy, regardless of her illness.
for alcoholism and other drug addiction,
My loved one did the best he could. I remember him before he was addicted, and I see him now without his addiction.
the loss of a pet sometimes isn't shared because of the fear of ridicule. Try thinking.
The love I have for my pet is very real, and I will only share my grief with those who will understand my loss.
Remember, when it comes to disenfranchised grief, you can't always change what other people are thinking, but you can always change your own.
I honor my losses.
As you see, there are different names for different types of losses. While each of us grieves in a unique way, the experience of a loss is universal. It's important to note that if loss is universal, so is healing. While you often have no control over a breakup, divorce, or death occurring, you do have complete control over the thinking that follows. You can create an experience of fully feeling the grief and desiring the healing, or you can become a victim of the pain. Affirmations are a valuable tool that can steer your thoughts towards healing and away from suffering. Let's now take a closer look at loss through a breakup in a relationship and learn how to focus our thoughts on healing, as well as ways to break through those negative beliefs so that we can manifest greater love for ourselves in the future. Chapter 2: Breakups and Breakthroughs in Relationships. The words people say to themselves and the words heard after a breakup have an impact and a message. Folks know that messages in fairy tales are not the truth. When we hear, "and they lived happily ever after," we all know that there is no real happily ever after. Maybe there is an authentically ever after, a hopefully ever after, or even a perfect for us ever after. Wouldn't it be great if after a relationship you could just shake hands with the person and say, "Thanks, that was great," and then go on your way? Or perhaps, "Thanks, I learned a lot of lessons out of that." Or, "What a wild ride that was. Take care." However, most of the time you are in deep grief and you feel as if you're standing under a dark cloud. Are there other options that you might think and perceive? The grief is real, but does there have to be a dark cloud? Could there be an afterglow of love instead? Could you surround yourself in gratitude of your love? Could you stop and think, "Wow, what an interesting time in my life that was. Wasn't that an amazing chapter?" Could you be curious about what comes next? Do you really have to be stuck under the dark cloud, waiting for the storm to come? Like most human beings, you probably see being in love as a hill with no relationship to the valley. Do the times when you are alone have value? We hope you will allow yourself to feel the pain of grief after a relationship ends. But know that constant negative thoughts will only add to the suffering. Talk to people, especially older people. Hear how amazing their lives were when they were in relationships and when they were without a relationship. In all levels of consciousness, speaking, meditating, praying, and saying affirmations have tremendous healing power, and so does silence. Some will even tell you that when their relationship ended, it was a profound time in their life, a time of recreation, reformation, and growth. In this chapter, we'll share many powerful stories and insights on breaking through after a relationship ends. If you can, try to open your mind to see how the end of a relationship can be perceived differently, even in a positive light. Part of what keeps many tormented is fear, and one of the underlying fears in the loss of a relationship is abandonment. For example, you might think, "He was supposed to be with me." How do you know that for sure? Maybe that simply isn't true, but there are other ways to see it. Perhaps you were supposed to be with this person in a romantic relationship from age 23 to 25. And then you were supposed to be with someone else for 30 to 51. People come in and out of your life, but love doesn't have to. Once again, this may sound like we're asking you to change your thinking, and we are. But what limits your thinking is when you believe that you can only have one way of thinking, usually a negative one. Ultimately, you really want to expand your thinking so that you see the many options and unlimited ways to perceive events in your life. Relationships offer us all new opportunities to understand who we are, what we fear, and where our power comes from, and what the meaning of true love is. The idea that relationships are learning opportunities may seem counterintuitive because we know they can be frustrating, challenging, and even heartbreaking experiences. And yet they can be so much more. Relationships give us our greatest chance to find real love and true healing. When you're grieving after a breakup, you can wrongly perceive that your wholeness has vanished. When you think your wholeness is impacted by someone else, you believe that you yourself are not enough. You are not complete. You can't find love, and you can't create happiness in your personal and work life. Instead of trying to find the right person to love, Let's make you more worthy of being loved. Rather than constantly asking your partner to love you more, become worthy of being loved by them. And if you are worthy and they still leave, then they weren't the right one for you. To find love, you must ask yourself if you're giving as much love as you wish to get, or if you expect people to love you more than you love them or yourself. The old saying rings true: if your boat doesn't float, no one will want to sail across the ocean with you. Seeing relationships differently. Before we examine the grief of relationships, we must look at how people think when they're in them. However you think in the midst of a relationship is how you will grieve afterwards. For instance, if you were coming from lack in the relationship, your grief will also reflect lack. If you are full of anger in the relationship, you will also have anger along with the grief after that relationship. The truth is, we don't just want to introduce a more expanded way of thinking about grief after a relationship. We want you to also see how expanded thinking might also work during a relationship. Joanna and her identical twin Grace were born minutes apart, but by chance Joanna was born 2 minutes before midnight on New Year's Eve, and Grace was born shortly thereafter. Even though one sister was only minutes older, they proclaimed their difference in birthdays proudly. And these identical twins were also very different in how they managed relationships. Grace was seeing a computer specialist who developed software to oversee how prescribed medications would interact with each other. He was also considered a hero by many since his work saved lives. Grace enjoyed being with him and loved their relationship. So when he announced to her that one day he had met someone else, she was devastated. She would say things like, "I guess that wasn't meant to be. Unfortunately, that wasn't the right relationship for me." She had a unique way of seeing things for what they were. "I guess that relationship was only meant to last a year," she remarked. Her twin sister asked her, "Didn't you think he was the one?" Grace answered, "Well, if he was the one, we'd still be together. The fact that the relationship is over means that it was supposed to be for a year, not a lifetime." Joanna painfully looked on, but her pain was not limited to her view of her sister's relationship. Her pain clearly shaped her own experience of love and romance, which had only two states. She was either in a relationship or she was in regret about a relationship. Her primary relationship was with Phil, a handsome sportscaster. In many ways, they were a great couple, but she still regretted ending her prior relationship with Max. If I hadn't made the mistakes I did with Max, she often wondered, would we still be together? When Joanna thought about her current relationship, she was terribly worried about making the same mistakes with Phil. Grace would simply say, "You need to forget your last relationship and the one before it. You've already learned whatever you need to know. Just be in your current relationship. Be with Phil." Well, that was easier said than done for Joanna, however. But what if I'm too quiet? What if I'm too aggressive? What if our grandmother had wheels, countered Grace? Would we be cars? These sisters were clearly processing the loss of relationships and transitions to new ones very differently. But they also experienced individual lessons because even twins are not here to go on each other's journeys. We each have an individualized flight plan for our learning. We often try to engineer or diagnose our internal processes and change our lessons. But life is expertly giving us what we need at any given moment. That doesn't mean we don't live life and experience mistakes. We don't want to take ourselves out of the game and just examine it. There is a point where self-examination becomes self-indulgence, and we must move on in order to change. We can't control others. We can't change our past, but we have full control over our inner dialogue. Once Joanna realizes that negative thoughts interfere with her relationships, then and only then will she gain self-awareness that her thoughts can create a different reality. Consider a thought such as, "I know I'm going to make the same mistake again." We can not only change it, but we can also use it as a guide for our healing. It could literally turn into a meditation with a mantra such as,
I have healed from my past mistakes.
Joanna was able to move past mistakes in her last relationships. People sometimes think, "Great, I've healed. Now everything will be perfect." The truth is that the world always moves towards healing. So for Joanna, it will not necessarily be smooth sailing, but in time she will move on to the next area of healing. When you heal part of yourself, the universe does not say, "Let's give her 6 months of smooth sailing." The universe says, "What's the next thing about Joanna that needs healing to move her towards happiness?" Many spiritual paths include the concept that anything, unlike love, will be brought up for healing. In Joanna's case, she looked at another personality trait that did not serve her. She began a diagnostic panel of Phil, asking herself, "Is he the one for the rest of my life? Would he be a good father? Will the sex always be good? Do my friends like him? Will my family approve?" You may think that these sound like reasonable questions to ask, and they are, but not 100 times a day. Many people aren't aware that they have 70,000 thoughts per day, and the shocking news is that these thoughts are mostly repetitious. Joanna's concept of a life or a relationship that is too closely examined is a life or relationship that is not truly lived. You can't be present in the moment, genuinely honest and open, if you're too busy running an analysis. Let's go back and examine some of Joanna's thoughts in her relationship that impact her grief if the relationship ends, as well as the quality of the relationship that she is having now. Here's the first question she asked. Is he the one for the rest of my life? The true answer to her question is that he is the one for today. There is nothing to question beyond the present moment. There is no happiness to be found in the future. The very fact that he is here today means that he is the one for today. Can you begin to see that this will help you live in the moment and in reality? He is the one for today is truthful. He is the one for the rest of my life may or may not be true. You simply can't know whether or not you'll be with someone for the rest of your life. When a relationship ends, you feel grief. But it's so much worse if you believe that your partner was the one and now you have lost your forever mate. Remember to use this affirmation.
He is the one for today.
Let's take a look at Joanna's second question. Would he be a good father? Whenever our thinking is focused on another person rather than ourselves, we won't find happiness. For Joanna, the question should not be whether Phil would be a good father, but rather, would she be a good mother when the day arrived? Let's be real here. Can we ever really know whether or not someone else will make a good parent? Many of us have had siblings or friends who we thought would make great parents, and they turned out to lack certain skills. At the same time, we've been surprised by others who we thought would be bad parents, and they turned out to be great ones. In the end, Joanna only has control of her parenting skills if and when that day comes. A more positive affirmation would be,
I am going to work hard to be the best mother I can be.
Joanna's third question, will the sex always be good? Ultimately, sex exists only in one place, between your ears. How turned on you will be in the future is none of your business. How much you bring to your sexual experience is all you need to focus on. Joanna can bring all her intensity, passion, creativity, excitement, and sense of adventure to the bedroom tonight. Do my friends like him? Was Joanna's next question. Your friends will be a reflection of the thoughts you send out. If you pose a question that contains doubt, they will have doubts. On the other hand, if you send out thoughts of happiness, your friends will automatically like your significant other because they see you are happy. The positive affirmation is,
My friends will like to see me being happy in his presence.
and finally, Joanna wondered, will my family approve? Maybe or maybe not. Most of the times your family members will pick up on your emotions. If they don't approve, remember, this is your life. This is your relationship. Only one person needs to approve of this relationship. You. The positive affirmation is,
I approve of my relationship.
all of our thoughts are valuable. You can't think one way during a relationship and then think completely different in your grief after a breakup. If your thinking during the relationship is negative or distorted, your grief will be negative and distorted. It's vital to see this as a continuum because if you believe that a relationship will go sour, your negative thoughts that permeated the relationship will permeate your grief. And when a new relationship comes along, you won't suddenly have magical, clear thinking. You'll be a victim of your patterns. Grief is a window that provides the opportunity to examine your primal thinking about relationships. If you're grieving relationships well, you will relate well. If you relate poorly in your relationships, you will have another opportunity to change your thinking and how you grieve and how you handle the next relationship. Knowing who you are. Vanessa laughs when she thinks back to her dream relationship. Happily married now to a man who was not the dream, she remembers that first big relationship with humor and love, and no longer with pain. When she was 27, she was overjoyed when she met Ron, a pediatrician at a party. She always knew that someday she would meet someone special who would recognize her specialness too. She wondered what it would be like to be one of those women who married a doctor. After 11 months of dating, Vanessa felt like she had arrived and grown up when Ron invited her to move in. It is my destiny to marry a doctor, she thought to herself. I'll do charity events for the hospital. When he complains about his work, I'll be the one who knows what it took for him to become a doctor. When people talk about how much money he makes, I'll remind them of how much school was required to get where he is. Vanessa went from hanging out in her local coffee house to having tea with the other doctors' wives. And yet, it wasn't all perfect. Ron could be a bit arrogant and self-centered. At one point, she suggested that they redecorate his bedroom, which looked more like a bachelor pad with its waterbed and wet bar. He snapped and said that the room was just fine. He'd had that waterbed for more than a decade and loved everything about it. Except, of course, when you had to drain it and refill it with fresh water. He told Vanessa how cold that first night always was when the water had just been changed. So she put changing the bedroom out of her mind for the time being, knowing that eventually she would get the opportunity to redo it. They celebrated their first anniversary with a trip to Maui, Ron's favorite island. But Vanessa had allowed a guest to join them, her fear. When Vanessa asked Ron if he had brought other women there in the past, he said, yes, this has always been my favorite place, and I came here with previous girlfriends and also when I was single. I once met someone here who ended up becoming my girlfriend. His honesty only made Vanessa more insecure. So let's examine her thinking at this point. Her thoughts were, am I just a number to him? If I hadn't joined him in Maui, would he have found someone else to keep him company? Will he ever marry me? You might imagine her bottom line question to be, do I really matter? Does he really love me? But that wasn't the issue here. It wasn't one particular thought. Rather, it was that all her insecure thoughts boiled down to, I'm invisible. I'm not worth it. I am completely replaceable. If you focus on the negative like Vanessa did, life gets worse. But if you focus on the positive, life gets better. While Ron may have been arrogant, what thoughts did he pick up from Vanessa? She felt unlovable, unworthy, and invisible. What was there for him to love? Or, the more precise questions are, who was there for him to love? If Vanessa wasn't enough for herself, how could she be enough for him? We wish we could tell you that Ron and Vanessa had a wonderful time in Maui, but in reality, she became her insecurities, and he became even more aloof. When they returned from their trip, he hoped that life would get back to normal. But Vanessa's insecure thoughts continued to plague her. I bet other women have lived in this house, she kept thinking to herself. She repeated the thought so often it eventually demanded an answer. So she curtly asked him, Have other women lived in this house with you? Once again, Ron answered honestly, Yes, but what difference does that make? You're here now. I just need to know, she said. But in a few days, she asked, Did they break up with you or did you break up with them? She had taken her focus off being in the relationship and put it on the other end of the relationship. She wasn't living life. She was already in grief. Ron realized that trying to reassure her would be pointless. He could feel the downward pull of her emptiness and her neediness. Eventually, the negative words that she had been expecting came. Vanessa, I think you should move out. Her negative affirmations had created her worst fear. She pleaded with him to change his mind, but his decision had been made. She moved out in a frenzy of rage. She knew she had been right all along. She was just a number, another girlfriend, nothing more. For the next few days, Vanessa found herself in a dark place. All of the thoughts and insecurities she had brought into the relationship had shaped her grief. Her negative thoughts continued as she angrily got her stuff out of his place and moved in with Yvonne, an old friend. After a few days, Yvonne said to her, Listen to yourself. I can understand why he didn't want to be with you. You don't want to be with you. You have no self-worth. You describe yourself the way he saw you. Who are you? Do you even know? Still trapped in her negative affirmations, Vanessa vowed that she would make Ron miss her, and she knew what she needed to do. She still had a key to his house, and she knew that Wednesday was always his busiest day in the office. When he was seeing his first patient of the day, she went to the house and let herself in. She remembered that he had complained of the cold first night after the waterbed had been refilled. So she began to drain it. For the next few hours, she sat by the bed, watching the waterbed empty, thinking how alone and cold he would feel that night, and then he would want her back. When the water had drained, she began the refilling process. Then she made the bed as if nothing had happened and left. The next morning, knowing he must have missed her terribly during the night, she waited by the phone for his call. By 4 p.m., shocked that she hadn't heard from him, she decided to call his office. He took the call, and she asked him how he was doing. Fine, he replied, sounding distracted. Frustrated, she asked, How did you sleep? Fine. She hung up the phone. She thought about the effort she had exerted in trying to make him feel uncomfortable and alone. She wanted him to feel the pain of loss that she was feeling. When Yvonne got home, Vanessa told her what she had done. Vanessa, her friend said, look where your thinking has gotten you. You are conspiring with his waterbed to make him feel like he misses you. But the key is, where are you in that situation? What was so great about you that would make him miss you? Was it your laughter, your smile, your great sense of style, your love of board games, your warm personality? You made yourself completely invisible and then accused him of not seeing you or seeing him as just another number. Well, now you're crazy girl number 5 who let the water out of a waterbed to make her boyfriend miss her. No one is going to think about you or how special you are until you do. What Yvonne said finally struck a chord with Vanessa, and she focused on her negative thinking for the first time. She knew that her behavior with the waterbed was ridiculous, but she hadn't put the threads together. Now she would need to show up for her grief, feel it, and deal with it herself. She finally understood that until she showed up for her life, no one else would. For the next few years, Vanessa thought about who she was in the world, not in relationship to her destiny as a doctor's wife or anyone else's wife for that matter. She volunteered at charities because she wanted to. She began to search for her favorite place in the world instead of being fixated on some guy's favorite spot. She started to see her life as a seed that needed nurturing, not as a vine that was growing on someone else's wall. She realized that looking at the other person kept her distracted from the real work in the relationship, herself. After continuing to work on herself for a few years, she met a great guy named Hank, who loved Vanessa for who she was. The waterbed incident became nothing more than a story that got rolled out every few parties by Vanessa or someone else. She often ended the story with, "If you think your negative thoughts, you're going to end up wasting a full day draining someone else's waterbed. When you think your good thoughts, you end up happy, and you end up sleeping well too." As the saying goes, how empty of me to be so full of you. The only person any of us needs to focus on, the only one we can work on, is the one in the mirror. It's always an inside job. In the end, Vanessa realized that her actions hadn't just been about wanting Ron to feel the pain she felt. It was about the abandonment that came up for her around him. Perhaps more important, she was learning how she abandoned herself. She found that if she allowed herself to grieve, she would be able to create a way to examine abandonment, meet it with understanding and love, and ultimately heal it. And that's what grieving well means. As you begin to see relationships differently, you'll recognize that they have a rhythmic flow. Some will last a lifetime, others a few decades, some a few years, and some only a few months. But there can be no judgment here. No matter how long you were with the person, the breakup deserves its personal time of grief. Grief after a relationship gives you the opportunity to understand your own healthy and unhealthy archetypes. Some people are astounded to witness the repetitive negative affirmations they say to themselves after a loss of a relationship. But these can be insightful moments that bring us closer to real love and healing. We see, perhaps for the first time, how we grieve a relationship reveals how we acted in the relationship. Ultimately, as soon as we spot those negative affirmations, we can turn them into positive ones that can reshape our future life and loves. The wrong person can be the perfect person. Many of us think that the relationship went sour or that one was just a waste of time, and consider those moments or years as something we'll never get back. But the truth is that each relationship is an experience that we have been uniquely and personally assigned, whether we are with that person for a week, a month, or a decade. When Marissa turned 30, she was still single. She had 2 prior relationships that had left her feeling terribly abandoned. She decided to get proactive and take matters into her own hands. She joined a popular dating service and checked in every day to see if someone had winked or flirted or sent her a message. She made a decision to meet every guy who showed an active interest in her. So she had lunches, dinners, coffees, drinks. Then when her work sent her to a nearby state for a conference, she found that the man in the seat next to her on her flight home seemed very interested. He politely introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Will." "My name's Marissa." For the next hour, they were deep in conversation. Marissa loved his energy, and when the flight attendant announced the seatbelt sign would be coming back on soon, Marissa quickly rushed to the bathroom to freshen up. She looked at her face in the mirror and considered putting on some makeup for him. Then she realized, well, he's already seen me without makeup, and he seems to like me. When she returned to her seat, Will said, "It would bring great joy to me, and I hope to you too, if you would join me for dinner." She smiled and said, "I would never want to deny you the pleasure of bringing great joy into my life. How about tomorrow night?" She loved that he made a plan so quickly. He even chose the time and the restaurant. They went out for dinner and chatted like they were old friends. For our second date, Will asked, "Would you be available tomorrow night for dinner?" She agreed. At the end of the evening, he said, "Obviously, I'd like to see you again. When are you available?" Marissa said, 3 nights in a row seem like it would be too much, and we'd be breaking all the dating rules. So let's do it anyway." The intimacy was great. The company was great. And yes, the sex was great. Marissa had a real sense that this was the one, the guy she'd been waiting for. On Thursday night, she said, "So what's your weekend look like?" "I do consulting for nonprofit agencies," Will said. "I'm running a board retreat this weekend, but I'll be back late Sunday night." "Where you going?" Marissa asked. "Anywhere I can tag along and get a few spa treatments while you're working?" "That one's tough," Will told her. "I have lots of dinners scheduled and I wouldn't really be able to see you at all." Marissa felt a horrible pang in her gut, but she tried not to let her feelings show. She wanted to say, well, at least we could sleep together, but she knew that would be too much. "I'll call you Monday morning when I get back to town, and we can make plans then," he said. Marissa was walking on air and thought of nothing but him. She immediately put her membership on hold at the dating service. On Saturday night, she met her closest girlfriends for dinner and told them about Will. One friend said, "Take it slow, you don't really know this guy yet." Another friend said, "Well, don't see him every night. Don't be so available. Guys like the chase." And the last friend said, "You're all so cynical. Let her enjoy herself and just be real." Marissa just listened and smiled unfazed. She believed what was going on was good. On Monday morning, the phone never left her hand. She was a wreck until he finally called at 11:30. "Are you free anytime soon?" Will asked. "Well, I think I'm free tonight," she said. They both laughed. She felt her pain subside since she had been saving this night for him. They had another great evening together, and Marissa felt a sense of love and wholeness when she was with Will that she'd never experienced before. They went on having dates nightly for the entire week. But once again, on Thursday night, he told her he would be away for the weekend. "It's rare that I would have 2 board retreats one weekend after another, but they tend to do that in the spring." Once again on Monday morning, Marissa waited for his call. When she hadn't heard from Will by noon, she decided to call him. It went straight to voicemail. She called again at 2 and at 4 and left a message, but she got no reply. She started to get very worried, but kept herself in check. The retreat must have gone longer than expected, she thought. But when he didn't call on Tuesday, she started to get really frightened. Had something happened to him? Was he okay? Maybe he lost his phone. Then again, if he did, could he have borrowed someone else's to call her? By Wednesday, his voicemail simply said, "There is no voicemail available for this number." Marissa was angry. She called one of her girlfriends and explained what had happened. "Whoa," her friend said. "You need to slow down and get a handle on reality. You just met this guy." On Thursday night, she had drinks with some of her girlfriends, who took her to task on the situation. The first one said, "Have you gone to his house?" "We planned on going sometime soon," Marissa replied, "but he said a gentleman should always pick up a lady. That's how we ended up at my place." "You mean a married guy should always pick up a lady at her house?" Marissa was stunned at the accusation. "Will is not married." Her friend looked at her for a moment and then said, "Think about it. He's never here on the weekends because he's with his family. He has to disappear because he realized there's nowhere for this to go." "Maybe he was married," the first friend added, "and he realized he liked you so much, but he had to end it." Marissa found no comfort in being with her friends, so she soon ended the night early, hoping that there was one message from Will on her home phone. But there wasn't. Over the next week, she expected to eventually hear from him, even if it was to say goodbye. In a few more weeks, her anger had turned to rage at what jerks men could be. She began to doubt her own feelings and feel duped. Will had rapidly gone from "he will call" to "he won't call." Weeks later, she still found herself calling his cell phone occasionally, but it had been disconnected. She came to the conclusion that he had been married. Why else would he go so far as to disconnect his cell phone? She couldn't imagine it was some pay-as-you-go temporary phone. If it was his real phone, she could have wrecked his marriage with one phone call. Her friends were right, and she had been gullible. She became consumed by the mystery of Will. Did he have a family? What type of person did something like this? What happened to Will, and why he did what he did became her obsession. The more she thought about him, the unhappier she became, and the more her sense of abandonment grew. Marissa secluded herself at home, drowning in depression and bitterness. She had never felt so alone. But then after a few weeks it hit her. Why am I suffering 5 weeks over 8 dates in 2 weeks? She thanked God it didn't go on for months or it would have taken her years to recover. She realized she had given Will more than he deserved. But more important, the degree of pain and grief she felt couldn't possibly be just over this man. 6 weeks later, Marissa signed back on the dating service, and her friends were happy but encouraged her to take things slow and go easy on herself. "I've taken 6 weeks to grieve," Marissa said. "I felt so alone. I always feel abandoned by guys. But I can't do this anymore. I'm starting to believe that my feelings of loss have very little to do with my dating." "You don't have to date if you don't want to," one of her friends said. Marissa shot back, "It's not the dating that has to change. It's about always feeling abandoned." In a strange way, dating Will was a great lesson because I was sure he was the one. It made me see what I do, how I set myself up. But I've worked long and hard to change myself and my thinking. She was referring to the inner work and affirmation she was doing. She realized that every day she had been affirming something. Usually it was something negative, such as, "I feel whole with Will. I need someone to complete me. I am only happy in relationships." But now she was counteracting all that with some new affirmations that she learned while working through her deep grief.
I am here for myself. Men may come and go, but I will always love and support myself.
We don't know Will's part of the story, but don't doubt that he will learn his lesson also. Since he was hurtful, Marissa could say,
His journey in life is none of my business.
It might seem strange, but Marissa realized that her brief encounter with Will was a gift. He was the perfect person to help heal her abandonment issues. And in ways that we don't know, she was perfect for him too. We could easily just leave it at Marissa met a real jerk. But what would that say about the universe? It just randomly sent Marissa a thoughtless guy? Why? Just to make her miserable? Could there be a reason? If this is an all-knowing, all-loving universe, always moving us towards healing, then there must be a good reason Will was sent to Marissa. Since she was so ready to use this man and this moment in her life to go deeper in her abandonment issues, in many ways, the wrong guy was the perfect guy for her healing. People in intimate relationships usually have the same issues, but in reverse. If you struggle with love, you'll attract someone who has issues with love. If you have issues with power, your partner will too, although not necessarily in the same way. And then, it may not be that obvious. If one person is bossy, he fears he lacks power. His partner may be submissive because she fears finding her power. A couple may have problems with addiction, but while one is the addict, the other may be the codependent partner or the rescuer. If the shared issue is fear, one partner handles it by being bold and fearless, while the other person is timid and makes little to no decisions. Like often attracts like, but in an opposite way. In other words, in any relationship, one person makes the pancakes, the other one eats them. What that means is typically, when a problem occurs, one partner wants to talk and work it out, while the other one prefers to be quiet, to let things settle down and work it out themselves. The more aggressive person pushes all of his buttons, and his refusal to deal with it pushes hers. Both people think the other has a problem and is handling it wrong. But in a very real sense, each one of them is perfect for the other in that moment in that relationship. Aloof and needy. Another example of a dance we do with each other is known as aloof and needy. While many people deal with abandonment issues, many others are faced with control issues. So it's not surprising that they find out that one person experienced abandonment in his childhood or her childhood, and the other one felt too controlled. When they grow up, one becomes needy while the other becomes aloof, and it's no surprise they go on a date with each other in adulthood. This may sound extreme, but many of us do have a little bit of both aloof and needy in us. While the abandoned, needy individual often fears the other person will leave, the one with the control issues, aloof, feels being overly controlled in the relationship. As the universe magically brings these two people together to heal each other, the person with the abandonment issue ultimately learns to quit abandoning himself or herself, while the control issue person needs to feel confident that no one can control him or her. When people have control issues, they often become aloof and retreat, which of course triggers their partner's abandonment issues. But the truth is, they're not being controlled. They are simply a slave to and being controlled by their own past. When these individuals are in an argument and feel controlled, they are usually living in the past. So in truth, they have lost control, not to their partner, but to their past. Some affirmations are:
No one can control me. I am my own master. When I am feeling controlled, I release the past with love and come into the present moment. I am free to do whatever I want. The choice is always mine.
Control issue people heal by recognizing their freedom and seeing that cause and effect exist in all experiences, but it doesn't originate with their partner. They have complete freedom to date other people, and the consequences may be the relationship doesn't grow. They may feel the partner should not expect to be put first, but the result is they may not be made a priority either, which probably doesn't feel good. This is very true about the abandoned person too. When individuals feel deserted, they reach out to each other from their wound, which automatically triggers their abandonment issue. When they're in abandonment mode, they are living in the past. If they let that run the relationship, no matter what the other person does, they will automatically feel abandoned. Some possible affirmations are:
No one can truly abandon me but me. I am always here for myself. The universe loves and cares for me.
Aloof and needy are one common archetype. The truth is, every relationship has been perfectly designed to bring healing. When a relationship ends and you sit in your grief, you can either receive the healing and grow or remain stuck. The relationship is over, so of course you feel grief. But take a moment to think about the things you learned so that you can receive the gifts. Or else you'll just do the same dance again with another person. Uncovering the gifts in a relationship. Barbara was a healer when she met Craig, who worked in corporate sales. She was in her late 30s, and he was a couple of years older. He worked for a large company, but did astrology readings on the side. She loved that he was quirky and wanted a different life. He hoped someday to be a full-time astrologer, since he hated the job of selling people things they didn't really want or need. He was only doing it because it was his father's line of work. Barbara, on the other hand, was an amazing free spirit. She had long blonde hair that seemed to draw the sunshine to her. Craig longed for her life because he felt that while hers was in color, his was a dull gray. He drove a company car, and she liked his stability, the fact that he got a paycheck every week. But Craig was dissatisfied with his life and was determined to find a way out of his world and into hers. Barbara told him that the way to begin the journey was to find a spiritual master. The master for Craig turned out to be an American Indian who smoked clove cigarettes. So Craig began smoking too. Barbara was shocked. She disapproved of smoking and couldn't believe he had taken it up. When she told him there would be no smoking in the house, Craig argued that he should be able to smoke in the den, so they compromised on that. He also thought that he should stop accepting his regular paychecks. Saying no to the corporate world would surely help him advance in his creative one. Craig believed that the corporation was draining the life out of him, so he quit and he gave up the company car and his salary. He wanted to earn a living as an astrologer, and although he got everything ready, the clients never came. "How do you intend to build your business?" asked Barbara. He had no definite answer. He just thought that spirit would bring him clients, that his practice would build on its own. He also thought he didn't need material possessions. After all, if he had to go somewhere, he could always use Barbara's car. She, however, hated the fact that she would now be responsible for providing his transportation. One day, after he had been up all night reading the astrology ephemeris, Craig told her, "I won't be making any money until late next year. That's what the signs say, so I guess I'll have to borrow money from you until then." He didn't ask, he just informed Barbara, as if he had peered into the future. When her credit card bill came, that was the last straw. Unbeknownst to her, she had been paying for Craig's cigarette habit all along. Barbara knew this no longer fit her picture. She went out and bought him a used car for $1,200 and said, "This is your gift. I encourage you to go live your dream." He reluctantly left, and then she felt betrayed and abandoned, even though she had sent him away. She felt like Craig had done a bait and switch. As a healer, Barbara believed that in the relationship, two people were meant to grow together, and she could not understand how they had grown apart. His spiritual quest made her feel taken advantage of and used financially. In her grief, she was also very angry with herself for not putting her foot down sooner. She saw the signs that things were going in a bad direction, but ignored them. She also gave Craig more latitude because she didn't want to interfere with the spiritual journey he was on. After the breakup, she would tell herself, "What an idiot I was." She bombarded herself with the question, "How stupid could I be?" She began to give a lot of energy to her own mistakes when one of her friends intervened and said, "You have to stop this, Barbara. You're not a foolish person, but you're portraying yourself as inept at life and relationships." Barbara realized that her idea of people growing together was half right. Ultimately, people grow, maybe together, maybe not. But as a healer and spiritual person, she made the mistake of thinking that growth always meant growing towards each other rather than growing towards each other's higher good. She was finally able to see that her relationships were ruled by fear. Fear that she would be alone. Fear that her man would leave her. Once she was able to stop fighting the concept that something went wrong or that he was the wrong guy, she could see the lessons. She began to see that even what she perceived was wrong could still have healing lessons for her. She started to understand the difference between getting what you want and allowing things to unfold for a higher purpose. She now tries to live by the following affirmations.
Love guides all of my relationships. My relationships move towards my highest good. All is well in my relationships. The person I am with has gifts to offer me.
Years later, Barbara and Craig reunited on Facebook. She had completed a psychology degree and was currently a psychologist with a private practice. Craig was preparing to survive the end of the world, which he believed was in 2012. Looking back at the intersection of their lives, it was so clear to Barbara that it was not meant to last. The relationship had occurred so that she could see his world, he could view her world, and they both could move on to their personal destinies. Nobody failed. That's just the way relationships are, even though we try so desperately to make them different, or somehow deeper or more fulfilling. After a breakup, sometimes we search for new love. So remember, a teacher will appear when you are ready for the lesson. When it's time for you to be in a relationship again, that someone will appear. It's challenging for many people when they focus on others that they are attracted to. They feel like they have romantic feelings for them, or they're just plain smitten. But love and feelings in some cases are not returned. Remember, we always have choice. We can continue to pursue those individuals, or we can release them to the universe with love. Fairy tale thinking. In the movies, when the main character falls in love with someone, but the affection is not returned, he or she keeps pursuing the unrequited love. And in the end, the target of affection, usually at a big dressed-up public event, realizes that the main character is indeed the one. But in real life, most say, "No thanks," or "Sorry, you're not my type." What is your thinking in that situation? She doesn't want me, but maybe someday she will. Or perhaps, I will make him love me. Or I will get him one day. Can you just accept the truth? Why let your fairy tale thinking manipulate the situation? This is a moment when you are struggling and should be grieving. Can you grieve the disappointment fully and be done? Why chase someone who doesn't want you? Why would you want to bring that kind of neediness into your consciousness? Instead, consider the following affirmations.
A person who loves me back is on his way to me now. The right person for me will know who I am. I don't have to convince anyone to love me. The right person will love me.
The grief you feel at the end of a relationship is sometimes a misperception that things didn't work out or that your life is going wrong. Of course, the loneliness hurts after a relationship ends. But allowing your thinking to focus only on the loneliness will make you even more miserable. Acknowledge it and be open to more positive thoughts entering your consciousness. Take a look at your grief and ask yourself, if everything's unfolding as it's supposed to, what else am I feeling? If you separate yourself from the grief of the relationship, you can drop into a deep inner cavern of an old wound and finally rid yourself of it. Under the grief, you may discover an abandonment issue that keeps repeating itself. Perhaps a perceived rejection from a parent when you were young, or a first love that spurned you. The healing of the inner wounds won't necessarily guarantee that you'll get your next relationship right, but you may find the clarity to understand that relationships never really go wrong. If you find that ending a relationship is extremely hard, just know that you aren't alone. Most people know how to begin and end a relationship, but rarely learn how to complete them. Every relationship is assigned to you for your healing. Grief after any relationship gives you the window to heal your wounds and begin anew. Each relationship gives you the opportunity to face your fear and anger. But more important, they give you the chance to come closer to authentic healing and true love. Ultimately, relationships with their mysteries and wonderful forces are our guides, teaching us to love and honor one another as well as ourselves. They may never produce the long-lasting emotional fix that we may have hoped for, but in grief, after they end, they remind us that we are not broken or incomplete, and they can deliver us to healing. We let go of our earth-made agendas in loving relationships. We cast aside questions of who will love us and for how long. We transcend all breakups to find a love that is magical and divine, created by a force greater than us, just for us. Many times relationships don't fit your expectations. It's easy to judge that the person or even the relationship is wrong. You can say to yourself, that was just a waste of time. But there is no waste in the universe. If the universe has sent you an amazingly sweet, loving person, and your consciousness was not ready for it, that person would simply have not been the right person for you in that time. The individual in front of you right now, the relationship, the situation, was divinely designed for your healing. When you accept that he or she was the right person for this moment in your life, you'll plant sacred seeds that will heal in ways you cannot imagine.
The universe sends me the perfect people for the perfect lessons. Happiness is my destiny. All people and all situations are delivering me towards my highest good.
Tapping into the love within. It's likely that you've heard about self-love, that your greatest love is within you. So we would like to take some time and break down how and why self-love works. You may wonder why we need to talk about loving ourselves in a chapter about grieving the loss of another person after a breakup. There is sadness and often loneliness that must be recognized and honored. But beyond that is an overwhelming emptiness that is more than the vacancy left behind by another person. The pain often causes as much, if not more, suffering than the grief of the loss of the person. The overwhelming emptiness is not the other person being gone, but the lack of self-love. Think of it like a huge tank. If yours is completely empty and someone comes along and fills it with affection and tenderness, you feel an amazing sense of love entering your life. You also feel a desperate neediness because your tank rises and falls dramatically with the ebb and flow of the relationship. Then, when the person leaves, you're left with nothing, and that kind of emptiness is gut-wrenching. But what if you had your own reservoir of love? What if someone else coming into your life simply added to it? How different would your relationships be? Grief is a gauge that allows you to take note of how you're doing in this area. Naomi met a really interesting guy named Gary at a singles event. She loved that they met there because there was no guessing whether he was interested in meeting someone. That was the purpose of the event. They went out several times over the course of 3 weeks, and Naomi was getting to know Gary. She had no agenda that this would be forever. Rather, she was just enjoying their time together. At the movies, the couple ran into friends of Naomi's who invited them to go dancing Saturday night. They agreed to meet at a local club, and everyone had a great time. At one point, the other couple took out their camera phones to take some pictures. First, they asked Naomi to take pictures of them. Then Naomi took out her own phone and posed with Gary for a few more photos. Gary grabbed Naomi in his arms in a warm embrace, and while they were posing, all of a sudden, she felt this huge rush of love. Her friend said, "One more picture just to be safe," and Naomi melted into Gary's arms. The next morning, Naomi showed the pictures to friends who said, "Looks like you two were really having fun." Naomi thought about the love she had felt when Gary put her arms around her. She thought about how different her perception was now, as opposed to what it would have been a decade earlier. Back then, she would have said, "I never felt a love like I felt like last night. Gary is amazing. He must be the one." She had done so much inner work since then that she knew Gary didn't hold an incredible, unique love that was only accessible when she was with him. She knew that he had somehow triggered the love that was already within her. It was not his embrace that sent a rush of love from him to her. Rather, she made the unconscious decision to feel the depth of that love. She also knew intellectually that while Gary was a great guy, after 3 weeks of dating, she knew she couldn't honestly say that he was the greatest love of her life. At this point, you may be wondering if the relationship continued. Gary and Naomi did continue to date, and she would add that they dated sanely. She knew that she had avoided a huge trap that was part of her old pattern. In the past, she would have believed that she met this most amazing guy, the one in the world who held the key to her deep love. She would have felt a neediness for that love that she believed only emanated from him. But now she knew better. The point of this story may sound like a cliché, but no one out there is your source or holds the key to the true love for you. True love is always inside of you, and you decide, consciously or unconsciously, whether you allow yourself access to it. In grief, it's easy to believe your love left with the person and you are now empty. But we are here to remind you, in your loss, that the love you accessed is still within you, ready and waiting. The next person in your life won't find it for you, but you can experience it whenever you are truly open.
All the love I need is within me. Other people remind me of the deep love I already have within.
Healing the past. Your mind is often at war with itself. It uses the people and situations around you to play out your inner struggles in the world in 3D. Grief is a time when you can look back at the past and review the patterns in your thinking. But as we've already mentioned, to go back and simply relive it over and over is painful and non-productive. If you have the courage to look at your past without blame, without criticism, without fault-finding, you can view how your thinking occurs and what it says. You can find clues as to the makeup of your behavior. That's how grief can provide us with a window of opportunity to not just look into how a relationship ended, but also to understand the thinking that built the relationship in the first place. The next story is about Carla, who had the courage to look into her past as an observer. She realized that as long as she could remember, she was unhappy. "I'd like to say I was born that way, though highly unlikely. For some reason, I was never a happy child," she said. Carla always felt like a victim in her life and unknowingly kept up a pattern of unhealthy relationships, followed by long bouts of grief. An example was when she was 28 years old, and she and Ben, who didn't want to be referred to as her boyfriend, broke up. Carla knew by society's standards that she was considered beautiful, tall, athletic, fun, and smart. She also had varied cultural interests. Without her ego involved, she could see that she was a catch. But that changed when she met Ben. She suddenly thought that she was unattractive, undeserving of love, and unworthy. She came to believe that she would never be happy and find love. If she did, it would run a short course and end in grief. She remembered, I felt so broken. I ended things with Ben because he had already met someone else he was head over heels with. Someone he was willing to actually call his girlfriend and do things with her that he never wanted to do with me. She felt that life was showing her that she was, in fact, not good enough. The grief had me crying day after day, week after week, she said, wondering where I had gone wrong. I wondered why God and the universe had to punish me over and over. Didn't I deserve love and happiness like others? Was I so different? My grief overwhelmed me, and I was almost fired from my job for my negative attitude. And then it hit her. Carla was able to see externally how dateable she was, but more important, she acknowledged that internally she felt empty, negative, needy. She thought, I wouldn't want to date me. I wouldn't want to be with someone who, despite having the potential for so much good, had such low self-esteem, disliked herself, and had no confidence. If I wouldn't date me, why else would anyone else want to? She realized that it was high time for her to become who she wanted to be, or more accurate, who she really was. She found various versions of one affirmation, and she would recite them daily. She would say to herself,
I love myself. I forgive myself. I totally release all past experiences. I am free to live in the now.
Carla decided that she would fake it until she could make it. She knew she would have to choose what a loving person would do. She understood that there was a better decision than embodying her negative past thoughts. It's similar to a saying from Alcoholics Anonymous. You can act your way into a new way of thinking more easily than you can think yourself into a new way of acting. It was a statement that made sense to her, since she knew that she didn't fully believe in the wonderful person she was inside. When Carla began to pay attention to her own negative thinking and replace it with something more positive, two moments stuck out in her mind. The first incident was when she was on a date and she asked herself, what would the confident me say in this situation? She was surprised that it came to her with such ease. Her date was staring into her eyes when he blurted out, "You're so amazingly confident." She recalls, it hit me in that moment that I was. There was some truth in faking it. At 29 years old, Carla had reached a level of confidence that she had not ever known before. She wasn't aware of crossing the fine line between faking it and actually making it, but she knew something was changing. She had thought that the saying, fake it till you make it, was more about faking a feeling. She didn't realize that it was about doing something until her mind, body, and spirit were all in touch with a belief that was already in her. It may have been buried deep down and hidden away, but she realized that this was conditioning her body and her mind to come back in tune with her self-truths. The second moment happened right after New Year's Eve. Carla knew she had a lot of work to do on herself and thought that this year, her New Year's resolution would not be about places she wanted to go or things she wanted to do, but rather about who she wanted to be. She told herself, I want to be confident, loving, and happy. Carla saw herself as someone who walked down the street with a big smile on her face that radiated outward to others, who would in turn smile a little more, and get a little extra bounce in their step. All of her previous attempts at finding validation in outward sources, dating, jobs, friends, had always backfired. And now she understood she had to find these things in herself first. She felt driven to change her thinking, so she wrote the following on a piece of paper.
I love and accept myself. I am worth it.
She taped that slip of paper on her bathroom mirror so it was the first thing she saw when she woke up. She repeated the affirmations when she brushed her teeth and applied her makeup. The phrases kept ringing through her head and her subconscious.
I love and accept myself. I am worth it.
Carla started doing this on January 1st, 2012. But sometime later, she didn't need that piece of paper anymore. She didn't need to look at it because she was automatically repeating those words in her head every day, all day long. 1 year later, on New Year's Day 2013, she looked in the mirror, laughed, and said,
I love you. I really, really love you.
I really, truly felt it, she said. For the first time in my life, I was able to look in the mirror and know I genuinely loved myself. For someone who spent a lifetime in self-hatred, it was a magical feeling that I can't describe in words. I know I still have work to do and more love to give to myself and others, but the feeling of being able to love myself and attract better and more loving people into my life has been astounding for me. My friends have noticed the change in the last year, and they say it's the happiest they've ever seen me. Recently, Carla had a roommate, Ellen, move in, reminded her of herself a few years ago with her self-doubts and criticism, always searching outward for the source of happiness and love. She suggested that Ellen listen to how terribly she was talking to herself and told her how she herself had replaced her negative thoughts with positive affirmations that really helped. Her roommate's response was, Yeah, that's a good idea. But Ellen never heard anything about it. A few months later, after listening to her continue to berate herself relentlessly, Carla brought it up for a final time, but she realized that her roommate just couldn't take that step. Ellen looked so lost. So Carla took a piece of paper and pen and wrote down some positive affirmations and gave them to her. When Ellen looked at what Carla had written down, she began to cry. Why are you crying? Because they're not true, Ellen said. I don't accept myself. I don't love myself. Carla smiled at her and told her, That's why they're called affirmations. Why don't you just fake it till you make it? Carla discovered that as much as she loved the feeling of giving her love to someone else, she loved the feeling of loving herself more, and she tried to explain that to Ellen. Ultimately, Carla knew her strength was in offering more positive options to Ellen, and that her real power was to do it for herself and model it for others. And she genuinely believed, now when a man comes along, he'll be a great addition to my life, but he won't define my life. Loving yourself no matter what. Shelley had been in a relationship with Bill for 4 years. She had felt that something was wrong for a long time, but was too afraid to end things. She had told herself over and over again, if I leave, I'll never find someone else. But she tried her best to gain Bill's love. She often felt depressed and discouraged because somewhere inside of her, she knew that trying to make Bill love her was impossible. She did everything she could think of, including buying him expensive gifts, but she never felt like she was getting anything back. She really didn't think he loved her. One night, exhausted from trying to be the perfect girlfriend, the perfect listener, the perfect everything to him, Shelley sat down on the floor in her bathroom and cried out of desperation. She thought, I'm not good enough for him. I just don't deserve to be loved. And if I leave, I'll be alone forever. Even as she sobbed on the bathroom floor, she knew that somewhere inside, she wasn't being true to herself. When Shelley stood up and looked at her face in the mirror, she saw deep grief and despair, and her heart went out to her own reflection. I have to help that woman in the mirror, she told herself. That was the first kind and loving thought she had had about herself in years, and soon afterwards found the strength to break up with Bill. At first, Shelley was grief-stricken and even more desperate than before, so she reached out to a friend who gave her a book of affirmations. She cried while reading almost every page because the affirmations were the opposite of the mean-spirited things she had been telling herself. She realized that not only had her boyfriend been treating her terribly, but she was treating herself the same way. Shelley went back to that same bathroom mirror and looked at her reflection and said, "I love you." It felt so awkward at first, but it also felt right. So she continued. She soon realized that the more affirmations and mirror work she did, the more she was able to distance herself from her old way of thinking. She eventually saw the truth in that she did love herself, no matter what, which became the mantra she repeated for the first 3 months.
I love myself no matter what.
It was perfect for Shelley because she knew that her mind would twist it around. I would love myself if I weren't getting so old. I would love myself if I weren't in bad relationships. Throwing, no matter what, made all the difference in the world for her as she discovered that she could be loved and love others all at the same time. She was surprised by how this inner work that seemed so small and unimportant could change her life. She remembered all her judgments about looking old, but she didn't try to tell herself that she was young and looked youthful. That would be wrong because it would affirm that there was a better age to be than the one she was at right now. Rather, she began to remove her attention from her inner critic and would affirm,
My spirit is youthful. My outlook on life is always vibrant.
One day, people began telling Shelley how radiant she looked, and she noticed that her life had become much better lately. She felt radiant. Sometimes, however, when the improvement scared her or her doubts would creep in, she would say,
I love myself no matter what. Even if I'm scared, I love myself. Even if I think my life is getting too good, I still love myself.
Battling her negative self-talk continues to be challenging for Shelley, but she learned how great it feels to wake up in the morning in a positive mindset, seeing her body as something wonderful, and not whether or not it looks thin or fat. That was quite a revelation for her. Shelley found that even when she went out by herself, she didn't feel alone because the positive statements she repeated throughout the day were her constant companions. She put cards and reminders everywhere in her house and car that said,
My life is so good. I am always grateful for my life, no matter what. I love life, and life loves me.
In the end, she recognized that her breakup with Bill was a good thing because when she was alone, she found something way better than what another person could ever give her: self-love. One of the quickest ways to nurture self-love and self-worth is through mirror work. Here's how you do it. Pick up a small mirror and look at yourself. If you feel resistance, keep in mind that it's coming from the part of you that finds yourself unlovable. Gaze into the mirror anyway and say to yourself,
I love you. I will be good to you. I love and accept you exactly as you are.
Give yourself the gift of practicing this every morning when you wake up and every evening before you go to bed. Make the agreement with yourself that whenever you pass a mirror throughout your day, you'll say something positive either out loud or silently.
You look good today. I'm happy to be with you. Good things are on their way to you.
Staying on your side of the court. Picture your world as a tennis court. You're playing with someone else. You only have control of your own thoughts, actions, and intentions, not what the other player does or thinks. So many times in grief, as well as in relationships, you may try to strategize, control, and operate from what the other person is doing. You have to bring your thoughts, words, and actions to your side of the tennis court. You have to focus on what you're doing and how the universe is responding. And it all starts with your thinking. Affirmations can help maintain positive thoughts. After a breakup or when a relationship is winding down, pay attention to your thoughts. You might be thinking, maybe I could have kept the relationship casual. Or he mistreated me, but everyone is human and we all make mistakes. It may seem more loving or spiritual to think, I should just accept him as he is and be with what is. But that thinking doesn't always serve you. Ask yourself, when he was being his authentic self, did that bring love, light, and joy into my life? Or was it just a brief infatuation followed by a lot of misery? Sometimes your mind tells you to stay in a bad relationship because you think you need a placeholder, someone who you think loves you and is there for you. If you could see your thoughts as energy, what kind of energy are you attracting and perhaps settling for? And who's responsible for that energy? When a relationship ends, it's so easy to obsess about the other person. Is she thinking about me? Does she miss me too? Is she analyzing the relationship like I am? All those thoughts are in the past. A past that probably didn't happen the way you see it anyway. Think about bringing your thoughts and energy back into the present. Bring yourself back to your side of the tennis court, because if your thoughts are all about someone else, who's managing your life? Who's taking care of you? What you probably wanted from your ex was to feel loved and cared for. But look how you're not loving yourself. Look how you're not caring for yourself, and how little you're giving to your own life. When you're obsessively thinking about someone, it's as if the person is taking up space in your consciousness without paying rent. As you reflect on the relationship with gentleness and compassion, notice how you settled for less, how you allowed yourself to engage with someone whose vibration didn't match yours. You may suddenly feel a pang or say, "Oh, but it did match." Even if it was true at one point, you sit here heartbroken and it's not true anymore. As you move forward, bring your thinking to a higher place. Thank the universe for this learning experience that resulted from that relationship, as it's helping you to heal and reminding you of who you truly are. Begin to fill your mind with positive new thoughts. Instead of saying, he just wasn't ready for a relationship, try saying,
I am looking forward to having new relationships.
Instead of trying to figure out why he didn't want to be with you, think,
I attract people who want to be with me.
Remember that the universe will test you. It may send you a few ambivalent individuals who don't know if they want to be with you. But be sure to stick with the affirmation.
I attract people who want to be with me.
When you are grieving, you can access a clear vision of your self-esteem. Your self-talk becomes more apparent, and you can observe areas that need attention. This can be a powerful time of healing old patterns. For example, let's say you go to a restaurant and order a tuna fish sandwich, but the server brings you a bacon cheeseburger instead. If you have high self-esteem, you'll say, the burger looks great, but I didn't order it. I ordered the tuna fish. You should get the sandwich you ordered because it brings you joy and makes you feel good about yourself. If you have low self-esteem, on the other hand, you'll probably be afraid to speak up and wind up eating the burger even though you didn't order it. The same is true in relationships. Why would you accept a relationship that doesn't truly reflect who you are and what you want? If your significant other doesn't bring you joy, then don't order that kind of relationship again. Try this exercise. Make a list of all the good things that you receive from the relationship. For example, maybe you receive love, companionship, and home-cooked meals. Make sure your list has at least 5 items. Now write down all the things you wanted to receive but didn't get. For example, maybe you didn't get understanding, compliments, and encouragement. Make sure this list also has at least 5 items. Once you've completed both lists, review the first one and give those things to yourself. Then take the second list and send those to your ex spiritually. If you wrote on your list that you didn't have a satisfying sex life, for instance, then wishing your ex a fulfilling sex life in the future. Or when your ex pops into your mind, send him love and wish him well. When your mind goes to his side of the tennis court and you're thinking about his role in the relationship, remind yourself that you're on the wrong side of the court and say, I lovingly heal my part in the relationship. When you see that your ex is moving on with his life, remind yourself that you are the caretaker of your life, not his. Place your attention on where you can bring more to your relationship with yourself. Instead of energizing the missed connection with your ex, how about bringing more love and compassion to your relationships with your family and friends? Try this affirmation.
Today I bring love to my life and everyone I encounter.
Use the review of your past to get to know yourself better right now and learn more about what you want. Sometimes reflecting on what you did or didn't feel right is a good way to discover what you want and don't want in a relationship. Perhaps being with a partner who had little time for you didn't feel good. Maybe being at home every weekend didn't feel good because you're more social than your partner wants to be. Or if you're passionate about current events, it probably didn't feel good to be with someone who wasn't concerned at all about what happens in the world. Try pulling back to see the bigger picture and understand all relationships are for healing. If you get no healing from the relationship, it will feel sad and pointless, and you'll be devastated by emptiness. But if you can see that this person came in your life to bring you to the next level, you'll understand that you live in a universe that is always conspiring for your good. To receive the healing, repeat this affirmation.
My past relationship is complete, and I accept the healing.
These next affirmations will help you grow to the next level.
I attract relationships that are fulfilling and fun for me. If any relationships come my way that are not fulfilling, I release them back into the universe.
When you grieve the loss of the relationship and look for ways to heal yourself, you will find that you can become the person you are truly meant to be. Grief triggers growth and can create a new foundation to receive even greater gifts from the universe. One of the important lessons in a relationship is that you cannot give what you don't have. You can't receive love if you believe that you're unlovable. That's why growth is an inside job. The most magnificent love could come into your life, and if you judge yourself as unworthy, you won't be able to accept it. You may think that it's always about the other person, but ultimately, the capacity to give and receive love resides solely in you. Hopefully, you've begun to look at your thought patterns in relationships. You can see how grief allows you to peer into your relationship dynamics. You begin not to judge your past as wrong, but rather that understand the relationship has delivered you to this new starting point. In love, there is no wrong person. There are only perfect teachers. If your relationship is crashing, the only thing to do is put on your oxygen mask and take care of yourself. Be gentle with yourself and love yourself. As we move to the next chapter, we'll be looking at another form of relationship loss, marriage that ends in divorce, and continuing the healing journey. Chapter 3. Doing Divorce Differently. Many people feel that marriages have failed if they don't last forever. The same way in which some claim that the only truly complete life is one that lasts 95 years, lots of folks believe that the only successful and complete marriages are those that last till death do us part. The reality is that marriages are successful and can heal regardless of how long they last, as long as they achieve what they were supposed to. When they are no longer needed, they are complete and successful. And yes, we realize the idea of calling a marriage a success when it ends in divorce is a radical, unusual statement. One of the truths of life is that happiness doesn't rely on relationships changing for the better. When a marriage ends, two people have usually faced the reality they can't change each other. They may have tried to change their spouse in order to make the marriage work, but after a divorce, the realization comes that this simply doesn't work. When you see this, you'll stop asking, "What if she never changes?" and start believing, "What if she was never meant to change? What if we were supposed to get a divorce?" And if you want to be who you really are in life, shouldn't you allow your spouse to do the same, even if that means the marriage will end? If you've been divorced, you must ask yourself, was the love I gave and received based on how love was defined for me when I was a child? Did my parents fight all the time? Did they get divorced? Was this marriage truly the kind of love I wish to give and receive? If you see love as being painful, complicated, a power struggle, or often cruel, then it's crucial that you examine why. People often choose the one they want to marry because of choices they made growing up. That isn't to blame it all on your parents. It's commonly believed that by the time you turn 25 years old, you can no longer blame anything on those who raised you. But sometimes after a divorce, you go into a long period of analyzing why the marriage failed, what did you do wrong, and so on. You may be surprised to look back and discover that what you watched growing up taught you, rightly or wrongly, how to manage relationships and marriage. The surprise is that you were already doing it 100% correctly because you did it the way it was modeled for you as a child. But you have the power to choose a new destiny for yourself and a new reality, post-divorce. Your thinking can lead you there in the same way that your distorted thinking can keep you stuck. Aidan, a 34-year-old attorney, was very successful in all aspects of his life except marriage. At a divorced men's group, he shared that he was exasperated with his love life and truly believed that he and his ex-wife belonged together. He went on to say that he had tried to develop a friendship with her since they had divorced 2 years prior. But whenever they were getting along, feeling friendliness and tenderness towards each other, he would end up saying something like, "See, I told you we should be together." It was frustrating for him because he interpreted every good moment that they had as a sign that reconciliation was their destiny. His ex-wife would say, "Why can't you accept that the marriage is over and we're just friends?" He told the group that he knew if he found acceptance, which he did occasionally, everything would be all right. The group leader asked him, "When you do get to the place where you find acceptance, are you at peace?" "I get to acceptance, but it doesn't always last," Aidan answered. "It's not very peaceful. It always seems to turn negative." The group leader pointed out it turns negative because the moment you find acceptance, you also think, "Now will she come back?" That isn't true acceptance. That's just manipulation your mind is doing when it tells itself, "If I find acceptance, then she'll come back to me." Let's take a closer look at what Aidan is telling himself. We should be together. In that comment alone, there are many negative messages, such as, "The universe has it wrong. Things are not okay as they are. My wife is not living the life she should. I am not living the life I should. Love has gone wrong. Things are not working out the way they're supposed to." When we examine the situation, we see that Aidan has not allowed himself to mourn his loss, and he can't heal his grief as long as he believes that his divorce shouldn't exist. His denial does not serve him. In fact, it only prolongs the acceptance stage of the grieving process. When you hear someone say, "It's easier to get over someone who died than someone who left me," this is one of those examples. When someone dies, there comes a point in your healing that you truly understand he or she is not going to be with you on this earthly plane. The person is gone. But when someone leaves you, the person is still out there but chooses not to be with you. Your distorted thinking could tell you, it doesn't have to end. We could be together again. That distorted thinking in grief is called bargaining and/or magical thinking. In the future, by the way, if both Aidan and his ex-wife are still alive, they could end up together. None of us knows what the future holds. But we do know that Aidan will never heal until he accepts the reality that he and his wife have divorced. Only then can he find healing in his grief. Some affirmations he might consider saying to himself are,
The universe gets everything right, including my divorce. All things are unfolding as they are supposed to. My divorce does not constrict my ability to love and be loved. My divorce has no power over my future. Some relationships will leave my life, and some will remain. I am open to experiencing love in any form it exists.
divorce can be an expression of healing. It may finalize a marriage ending, but it does not have to stagnate or block your ability to love. Aidan is using negative affirmations and negative thoughts to try to process what has happened. When he processes grief with negativity, he will come out with blame, guilt, and the belief that things have gone wrong. He can shift his thinking, even if he needs to fake it for a while, to add those positive affirmations that will open his soul to the healing that needs to occur. Sometimes you can't get to a place of positive thinking, and you may have to just work from where you are. So Aidan says, "My wife doesn't understand that we should be together." He might consider not fighting the thought, but shifting it too.
I think we could still be married, but there is a greater knowledge in the universe. I don't know what could or couldn't happen. I lovingly release my limiting beliefs.